Welcome to Street Interviews. I'm Asad and today we'll be asking the people what they have to say about the Omicron variant of the coronavirus and what do they think that the government should be doing to combat this issue. Let's see what the people have to say and get a real perspective across to you today. The new Omicron variant of the coronavirus, does it worry you at all perhaps?
It is worrying me a little bit, yes, because we're not quite sure. It's a new virus, we don't know what's going to happen. People think that we're not going to catch it, it's not going to come to Manchester, and I'm sure it will.
And what do you think about the government's handling of it? Do you think the government are taking the right precautionary steps at the moment with the introduction of masks in school, in public transport and also in shops? Do you think that's the right measures early on to stop this from spreading further?
Yes, I do. I think they're trying their best to do the right thing, yeah.
And do you think the government should perhaps look into considering a lockdown if these cases keep rising, keeps getting worse? Do you think a lockdown should be put in place before Christmas, although it could disrupt lots of people's plans?
We've only got like 4 weeks to Christmas, and I don't think we can have a lockdown just yet. I really don't think we can have a lockdown.
Okay.
I'd like to think we could, but no, I don't think we can. Just because of the economy, we're just getting back up in Manchester. I don't think it's a good thing to do right now.
What's your thoughts on the new Omicron variant? Does it worry you at all?
Well, my personal thoughts on the virus itself is that it's man-made, it's not natural. It's quite obvious now. I mean, a lot of scientists have suggested that it's man-made, so created in a lab. So this idea that it came from a wet market is baloney, as far as I'm concerned. Secondly, this new if we're discussing the Omicron, it's just, well, my personal opinion with the variants are just additional things that have been released.
And what do you think about the fact that the government has now reintroduced masks into shops, into public transport and also into schools? Do you think this is a good move or completely absurd?
Well, I think you need to protect yourself against it. I mean, masks and gloves was a good idea. It's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, and the people that are peddling them are making a huge amount of money, as we already know. So it's there is part of that that's questionable, I think.
And do you think that there should be another lockdown in place, probably to stop the spread of the Omicron variant across the UK, or just no, not at all before Christmas?
I'm not sure about that, because they've tried to recently do lockdowns, and it's made no difference because people still catch it. So it's still killing people whether you lock down or not. So I'm not altogether sure about what I think about that. I still think you should protect yourself against things. But the point being, we've been living amongst viruses for thousands of years as a human society. So we're always going to catch stuff. And if people are going to meddle about like they're doing, releasing things on purpose for reasons we're not being told about, then people are still going to carry on catching things, aren't they, you know?
What do you think of the Omicron variant? Do you think it's a real worry for yourself, or do you not really see it as a potential worry?
I think it's a worry for everybody, to be honest. Coronavirus should be, but not to the stage where people are panicking. If everyone was sensible and do what they're supposed to do, and isolate when they should, test when they should, I think we should be able to keep a lid on it. But from what I'm reading, less people are isolating when they've tested positive than were at the beginning of the pandemic, and that is worrying, that a virus is out in the general public. But the thing with viruses is, once it's in a population, it isn't going to go away. We have to learn to live with it. It's going to take quite a few years before it is just like the common cold, and we treat it as such. It takes people time to build up their immunity and resistance to viruses and infections such as this.
And do you think perhaps the government is right now to bring in those measures such as masks back into public transport, back into the shops and also back into the schools? Do you think this is the right move going forward?
Personally, I do. It's not very pleasant being coughed on and sneezed on by other members of trams and buses that I'm sharing with. And to be honest, if people generally, when they had a cold, wore a mask, there'd be fewer colds around. But obviously, people can't be expected to do that. But I think at the moment, currently, until this virus has settled and we're more used to it, I think it is sensible to bring these precautions back, to be honest.
And do you think perhaps a lockdown should be on the cards going forward, just in case we see a rise in cases before Christmas, or should we not do this? Because, as you know, last year Christmas was cancelled, and people don't really want Christmas to be cancelled this year again.
I wouldn't like another lockdown, to be honest. But it's what the government decides. And again, I mean, last Christmas was awful. I've got 2 children living in Italy. I've got one living in London. I couldn't see any of them. Couldn't have my mother over because she'd been mixing with other people. It was her bubble. It's a difficult one, but I wouldn't like to see another lockdown personally. But if the government brings it in, we've got to adhere to it, haven't we? What can we do?
What do you think about the Omicron variant? Do you think it's something that you yourself worry about?
I think, yeah, it's like to an extent. I mean, I know that I'm safe personally. Well, I feel like I am safe, but I'm more worried about it in terms of like a lot of my family live abroad and I've not seen them in a while. So like I'm more worried about that because like I haven't seen them in so long and I've been supposed to see them, but it always gets delayed. So like, but in terms of like health, I think it is worrying because especially with like I think for countries like the UK and like Western society, it's not really as worrying because we have like the vaccines and stuff, but then the problem with that is like an unequal distribution of health in like lower income countries and makes it worse and then keeps the problem going. So I think it is like worrying, but I think we as like a Western society are more privileged and don't have to worry as much, but then we start to worry because other countries that haven't been vaccinated, it keeps on getting worse, and then people get upset because then they can't go on holiday when in reality there's people in like lower income countries that haven't even been vaccinated.
And what do you think about the government's response to this situation by bringing masks into schools, public transport and shopping centres? Do you think that's a good way going forward, or do you think that's kind of a bit of a slow move and it's not great?
I think it's good. Like, I definitely think it's a good implementation, but I think the best implementation really would be like vaccinating worldwide and then actually eradicating the problem, but that's never going to happen if the UK don't want to help lower income countries out and like give them the necessities to have a vaccine and stuff.
And what do you think about lockdowns? Do you think perhaps there could be a better way to deal with this whole situation and just cause a lockdown throughout the whole country and prevent any further case of Omicron to actually spread like they are right now? And do you think lockdown would be good before Christmas, or do you think it's off the cards? Because as last year we saw, Christmas was cancelled and people really didn't take well to this. Do you think it would be a good idea to bring lockdown in now or not?
I don't really know. I don't really think so. Like I said, I really think we need to tackle the problem in other countries until the whole world has been able to be vaccinated. I don't think we're ever gonna, because it's just going to be more and more variants. Like, if there's countries that haven't been vaccinated and haven't been dealt with appropriately, then of course COVID's never going to go. I think a lockdown might help temporarily, but I don't think it's going to prevent the problem in a long-term scheme of things.
What do you think about the Omicron variant? Does it really worry you at all or not?
To be honest, I don't actually know much about it, so I don't know if there's been that much information put out there. Like, I'm not sure why it's more dangerous than the other variants and things like that. So yeah, if I knew more information, then maybe I'd be more worried about it. But at the moment, no.
And what do you think about these new regulations from the government, such as putting masks back into public transport? They've also put masks back into schools now in communal areas, and also masks back into shopping centres, and also where you shop like Asda and stuff as well. Do you think that's something that you're happy with, or do you not think it's the right move forward?
To be honest, I think if they were going to re-implement it, they just shouldn't have taken it out anyway, because you're just getting the public used to one thing and then used to another. So they should have just kept masks as a thing that people were used to, rather than it being not compulsory and then compulsory, then not compulsory. So I do think they shouldn't have got rid of them, but I think now that they've got rid of them, it's just long bringing it back.
And what do you think about lockdowns? Would you be happy to see another lockdown before Christmas, or would you not like that to happen at all?
So I guess it depends on the extent of the lockdown. Obviously, schools are going to be closed anyway, but in terms of shutting down the whole of society again, I don't think that would really be good for anyone. But no, I do think if it's just more like legislation, so like say maximum capacity in shops and things like that, I'd probably agree with. But full lockdowns, then no, I don't think that should be done.
What do you think about the Omicron variant? Do you think it's a worry for yourself?
Yes, I think it's quite dangerous for students from what I've heard because we work in quite tight spaces together and even lecture halls are not really used in the way that it should be used for now. There's no social distancing in place.
And what do you think of the government's response to it by bringing in masks in public transport? They've brought in masks in schools and they've also brought masks in back into shops. So do you think this is a good thing by the government or do you think it's a bad move?
I think that's a great news because previously I've seen that no one wears a mask ever, even probably 10% of the people I see around, and I think it's good. It's good even for the flu or any other small sicknesses. Yeah.
And what do you think about lockdowns? Do you think lockdowns could potentially be reimposed across the UK to prevent the Omicron variant from spreading further?
I think there might be a lockdown, but for students it won't be great because we pay a really high amount of student fees, tuition fees, and if that will be replaced by a screen, then there will be no point for paying that fees.
For variant potentially worrying to yourself, what do you think of it?
I think it is worrying, yeah, potentially. The variants are becoming more prevalent because not enough people have had the vaccine, for my money.
And what do you think of the government's response to this situation? They've brought back in masks in public transport, in schools, and also those shopping centres and stores. Do you think this is the right move by the government or is this not a good move by the government?
I think it's the right move because they need to get ahead of the curve sort of thing. They've been behind it all the way through, so I think they need to get ahead of it. Hopefully they will.
And what do you think of lockdowns? Do you think lockdowns should be on the cards at the moment to be further implemented if cases continue to rise and that should not be ruled out before the weeks leading up to Christmas?
Yeah, definitely, yeah. It should definitely be on the cards. I mean, hopefully we don't get to that stage, but it should definitely remain an option.
The new variant of Omicron, do you think it's potentially worrying for yourself or not really a big threat to you?
Potentially it can be worrying depending on obviously lockdown and stuff and everything as well. Obviously the other variants were quite impactful in regards to travel and everything because I've got my mum's abroad as well, so it may impact her in regards to might have to quarantine on her own in hotels. That might come back again for certain countries again, so that's very worrying as well because the red list coming back again as well.
And what do you think about the government and the fact that they're also putting in measures such as masks in public transport, also in schools and also in shopping centres? Do you think these are good measures by the government to prevent this from further spreading?
I think they are good measures, but I think they're too late sometimes. I think some of it we need to flatten the curve a little bit later, but it should have been done beforehand. It should have been done earlier. It should have probably maybe 2 or 3 months beforehand. A lot of people were vaccinated, but a lot of people are anti-vaxxers, and they're not doing anything at all. So it's a very two ways of anti-vaxxers and people that are vaccinating. So there's two schools of thought really.
And what do you think about the lockdown? Do you think that's just something that government should be on the cards for them? In fact, if cases continue going up, do you think that's something they should be imposing going forward?
I think lockdown, I don't think it'll be the case. The reason being is because I don't think Boris Johnson has the fortitude in regards to to do a lockdown. I think he'd be too scared in regards to the other voters. He's already lost a lot of votes anyway in regards to putting a lot of lockdowns in place, and also a lot of businesses will fail in that regards. So I don't think lockdown will come. I think what it may do, it may be that certain restrictions may come. For example, you won't be able to go to gyms, or certain shops will not be open, or bars, etc. Or bars will start closing at certain times instead around Christmas time. I think that's what I think it'll be.